So there's only a handful of weeks left before 2024 does one. That's still plenty of time for Motorola to spaff out a few new phones. Starting with this here, Moto G35, one of the cheapest options out there at just £149, or even cheaper if you catch it in one of Motorola's sales. But is it cheap and cheerful or just cheap and nasty? Well, let's whip the Moto G35 on out of that box, take you on a full on tour of the camera tech, the gaming chops, all that good stuff. For more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first up, what do you actually get stashed in that box? Well, of course, you get the Moto G35, which as you can see there actually comes pre-clad in a condom case. Always a worthy extra. Remember kiddies, keep it wrapped, keep it safe. And you've also got yourself a Type-C to Type-A USB cable and a quick start guide and a pokey SIM pin jobby, and that's basically it. Bugger all adapter in the box, so you will just have to reuse your old one or spunk out a little bit more cash for a fresh one. So the Motorola Moto G35, obviously down at the budget end of the price range, so therefore expectations should be set accordingly. Now that display has grown from the previous G34. It's now a 6.72 incher, and as you can see there, not exactly the slenderest of bezels, especially this whopper down below. You got a proper bit of Jimmy Hill chin action. But that said, Motorola has gone with a long and thin design, quite a stretched aspect ratio, so the Moto G35 is pretty comfortable to clutch. It's quite a skinny phone, as you can see there, so you don't really feel the impact of those flat edges. Don't get any corners digging into your hand flesh. And you got a good bit of rounded corner action too. Motorola has slapped a Gorilla Glass 3 coating on that display, so relatively scratch resistant, but you will want to be careful, especially as there's bugger all pre-installed screen protector action on there. But I tell you what I love about the Moto G35, and that is the arse end. It's a bit of soft touch vegan leather action here, which is quite fancy pants for this sort of price point. Vegan leather, of course, just a hipstery term for fake leather. It's not actually made from vegans, sadly. And you got a choice of black, red or green finishes, and no prizes for guessing this is the green model. As a big fan of the old Lumia phones of yesteryear, I do appreciate a bit of colour in my mobiles. Something that modern smartphones are often bereft of. And that slender design, not hampered by the camera bump either, which as you can see there, barely pokes out of that back end. And the Motorola G35 fully water repellent, which means it doesn't mind getting a wee bit moist, but certainly don't go dropping it in your sink, your bathtub or whatever. Now, as usual with Motorola blowers, you've got a pretty stock version of Android running on this thing. It's not the latest, freshest Android 15, it is just Android 14. But as you can see there, similar sort of vibe to the likes of the Pixel smartphones. Motorola has tweaked the fonts and a few other wee bits of the UI, but for the most part, this is vanilla Android. However, you do get a few bonus Moto apps chucked on here, including good old Moto Secure. Adds in some pretty useful stuff, including pin pad scramble. This can just jumble up the numbers in your pin pad when you are entering your pin, so anyone squinting over your shoulder can't get a quick, easy read of it. A few other wee bits chucked in there. You do actually have an edge-mounted fingerprint sensor here on the Moto G35, which as you can see there, pretty responsive. Gets you straight into your desktops, and it is backed up by a bit of face unlock as well if you can't use your digits because they're a bit grubby or whatever. Although this one's a wee bit hit and miss if the lighting ain't great. You've also got family space, which is quite good if you're just handing this phone off to a kid or whatever, but there's no Moto app on here, which is quite a useful hub to quick access all of Motorola's features and tools that it's chucked on here, stuff like the gesture support. So we'll have to hunt this stuff down in the settings if it's in there at all. Thankfully the gestures also, yes, that does mean your Uncle Spurt's favourite feature, Fast Torch, is present and correct. Sadly, some of those other great features like the dedicated gaming mode, not available on the Moto G35. When it comes to software support, Motorola still hasn't exactly nailed it, unfortunately. This bad boy will get Android 15 at some point, although God knows when, and then apparently it will also get an update to Android 16 after that, and then that's your whack on the OS update. You can also expect 3 years of security support, although it'll probably start to trickle to maybe like quarterly updates come that final year. And a thrilling subject of storage, where you got a choice apparently of 128 or 256 gigs here on the Moto G35. Although last time I checked on the Motorola UK website, 128 gigs was the only available option. So good thing then that this storage is expandable via micro SD memory card up to a further terabyte in size. Now, as I mentioned, Motorola has boosted the screen size for the G35 generation to 6.72 inches, but it is once again IPS tech. Not a massive shock at this sort of price point, although you can get some OLED smartphones at this sort of budget. Thankfully, with the growth in size, you do now get a boost in resolution as well to Full HD+, which is the minimum I would expect in 2024. So visuals still reasonably crisp, though they don't exactly pop off of that panel. Apparently this panel is HDR10 certified, but you certainly can't stream any HDR content in Netflix, at least at the time I shot this video. And as it's an IPS panel, the contrast is kind of limited anyway. Certainly don't expect proper inky blacks, while colors won't exactly dazzle you either on the default vivid mode. But at least if you're sensitive to the flickering on OLED displays, you don't have to worry about that here. There's no PWM dimming shenanigans or anything like that. And that refresh rate maxes out at 120 Hz, so silky smooth for supported apps as long as the performance can keep up. And also Motorola reckons this is a water touch display, so more responsive than other phones when it's a bit moist, but I haven't really found that's the case, to be honest. If it's raining on this thing, you'll still be struggling to use your apps and it'll bulk up just like any other blower. Fantastic news for headphones fans though. If you want to get wired in, you do actually have a headphone jack. And more good news on the audio front, because the Motorola G35, despite being a budget blower, does have a stereo speaker setup.
Young Uncle Spurt looks like Jimmy Carr. Safe to say you've aged like a fine wine. It's very kind, but honestly, most days I feel like I've aged like any episode of Jim Will Fix It.
And yeah, technically it is a stereo speaker setup, although the earpiece speaker is a lot quieter and more tinny compared with the bottom speaker, so not exactly well balanced, but at least when you do max out that volume, it's loud enough, that bottom speaker compensates enough so you can clearly hear what's going on, even if it's a fairly noisy environment. And you do have a bit of Dolby Atmos support on the Motorola G35 as well. Best enjoyed in this case through a connected device. Now, the old Moto G34 was powered by Qualcomm's creaky old Snapdragon 695, which we'd seen stuffed inside of God knows how many smartphones before it, Motorola or otherwise. And it was always perfectly capable, but not exactly setting the world on fire when it comes to the performance. It was occasionally a bit juddery and gaming was limited as well. But for the Moto G35, Motorola has stripped out that Snapdragon and replaced it with a Unisoc T760. This is backed here by a mighty 4 gigs of RAM, which means the everyday running can be a bit juddery at times, shall we say, especially if you're trying to use the likes of the camera app. It's okay for your everyday shenanigans as long as you're a wee bit patient. If you are a gamer, then you might want to look elsewhere, although to be fair, the Moto G35 can handle a wee bit of Call of Duty, PubG, those less demanding scalable games on the lower graphics settings. Call of Duty ran with a perfectly fine fluid rate. It was occasionally a wee bit juddery, but not to the point where my amazing skills were particularly hampered. Still managed to actually win a game and get MVP as well, God knows how. And as you'd probably expect from quite a low-powered processor, there was no heating involved here either. And yes, thankfully you do have 5G support, otherwise that would be a bit of a backward step from the Moto G34. The Motorola G35 also supports NFC and the like, so there's no obvious omissions there. But when it comes to battery life, it is an absolute banger. You've once again got a 5000 mAh cell crammed inside that lovely vegan-y chassis. And that combined with the lower powered chipset means that the Moto G35 can keep on going for hours, days, in fact, on a single charge. The battery barely drains at all when the phone is at rest, and even when you're using it, it's a slow trickle. So yeah, no worries, no matter what you're getting up to in this thing. If you're doing a good bit of gaming on Call of Duty or PubG, if you're using the camera lots, etc., you'll easily still make it through a very long, very full day, possibly a full weekend if you don't go too crazy. The battery charging speed's pretty slow again, just like the previous generation. 18 watts, I believe it is, it tops off at. You're gonna have to plug it in for well over an hour to get a full charge of this thing. And let's finish this lovely wee Motorola Moto G35 unboxing and tour with a squint at the old optics. So what you have here is a 50 meg main camera, and that is now backed by a fresh new 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter. You got all your regular bonus camera shenanigans, the likes of a portrait mode for instance, full on pro mode as well if you do want to mess around with the likes of the white balance, the shutter speed, etc. But I kept the Moto G35 on that auto mode and the photo results weren't surprising at all. This phone is fine for simple shareable shots, although more vibrant subjects do kind of lose a little of their luster. And this shooter also struggles when it has to deal with sharp contrast, while at night time you will quickly notice quite a lot of noise creeping into your snaps. You'll also have to keep your hands proper steady if you don't want a blurry pic, as the shutter speed isn't exactly nippy. Swap to the ultra-wide shooter and photos are clearly lower resolution while tones are further muted, so it's not exactly a stunning addition to the setup. If you want to shoot a bit of video, the Moto G35 can do that at up to 4K resolution. And again, don't expect too much and you won't be disappointed. The Moto G35 isn't bad for just shooting short clips to share about the place, but as long as the lighting isn't total trouser. And around the front end of the Moto G35, you've got a 16 megapixel selfie shooter, which you can use to capture up to full HD resolution video, as well as those obligatory selfies when you're out and about. These stabilization's actually not too bad, so you don't have to worry about keeping your hands super still. And the audio capture, as you can hear, is pretty decent too. And that right there, my lovelies, in a delicious wee nutshell, is the fresh new Motorola Moto G35. Quite the attractive looking budget blower, of course, very basic stuff when it comes to the performance and the camera, but certainly redeems itself somewhat with that slick, stock Android sort of vibe, and of course the bloody brilliant battery life. And on top of that, it only costs about the same as a couple of coffees and a croissant at any London train station. So that's why I reckon the Moto G35. Be great to hear your thoughts on this budget blower down in the comments below. Please do poke, subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a ruddy, wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you.